The first thing you notice about Frost Hollow is the silence. It's the kind of quiet that presses against your ears, thick and unyielding, like the snow that blankets the ground, pure and undisturbed but for the occasional drift that whispers secrets as it dances in the cold wind. I arrived under the cover of darkness, the only sound my boots crunching over the frozen ground, my breath forming clouds that lingered in the air before dissipating into the night. I'd been tracking these bastards across states, following whispers and half-heard rumors, all leading me to this frozen hellhole. Frost Hollow. A name as cold as the welcome I expected to find. I wasn't wrong. The town, with its dimly lit windows and smoke curling lazily from chimneys, seemed almost picturesque from a distance. But even from the outskirts, I could feel it. The wrongness that clung to the place like frost on the branches of the gnarled trees that lined the road. The note that had brought me here was burned into my memory, the words scrawled in a hurried, almost frantic hand. They don't bleed like we do. I didn't need any more warning than that. I knew what awaited me in Frost Hollow, and I welcomed the challenge. Vampires. Creatures of the night that preyed on the innocent, hiding behind human facades while they drained the life from their victims. I made my way to the center of town, moving through the shadows, my every sense on high alert. The streets were deserted, the silence so profound I could hear the faint rustle of my coat, the steady thump of my heart in my chest. It was as if the town itself was holding its breath, waiting for something, or someone, to break the stillness. The cold was a living thing, a beast that clawed at my flesh, seeping through my clothes and biting at my skin. But it was a familiar discomfort, a constant companion on nights like these. I welcomed it, let it sharpen my focus. The chill reminded me I was alive, that I had a purpose here. I found the first sign of them by accident, a footprint in the snow, too delicate to belong to any animal native to this wilderness. It was followed by another, and then another, leading away from the main road and into the dark embrace of the forest that bordered the town. I followed, my hand resting on the hilt of the knife at my belt, the weapon cold and reassuring against my palm. The forest was a maze of shadows and moonlight. The trees stood silently. I moved carefully, avoiding the patches of moonlight that broke through the canopy, aware that I was no longer the hunter, but the hunted. The realization wasn't new. It was a truth I'd come to accept long ago. But here, in this place, it felt more acute, a sharper edge to the ever-present danger. I didn't have to wait long for them to show themselves. There was a rustle, a shift in the shadows, and then they were upon me, emerging from the darkness with eyes that gleamed like coals. Their faces were pale, their features sharp and cruel, twisted into snarls that promised death. The fight was brutal and swift. I relied on instinct, on skills honed through countless encounters with their kind. My blade found its mark again and again, slicing through the cold air and into flesh that was too cold, too dead to belong to anything human. They were strong, faster than any creature had any right to be, but I was prepared. I'd come to Frost Hollow for this, to hunt, to kill, to rid the world of another shadow. When it was over, I stood alone among the ashes of fallen, my breath coming in ragged gasps, the taste of blood, metallic and sharp, lingering in my mouth. The snow around me was disturbed, stained dark in the moonlight. I looked down at my hands, at the blood that coated my skin, and felt nothing. There was no joy in the kill, no satisfaction. There was only the cold, the silence, and the knowledge that this was only the beginning. The dawn in Frost Hollow was a mockery of warmth, the sun a pale ghost in the sky, offering light but no comfort against the cold that sank deep into my bones. The town stirred to life slowly, reluctantly, as if each creak of door and whisper of wind was a sigh of resignation. I watched from the shadows, a specter among specters, the events of the night still fresh in my mind, the blood on my hands now just a memory. I moved through the town with purpose, each step measured, each breath a plume of mist in the chill air. The townsfolk gave me wide berths, their eyes darting away when I caught their gaze, as if they could sense the darkness that clung to me. I didn't mind. Solitude was a familiar cloak, one I wore with ease. It was better this way. Connections were liabilities, distractions that could mean the difference between life and death in my line of work. My first stop was the outskirts of town, to the north, where the wilderness encroached upon civilization, a no-man's land where shadows reigned even at noon. The vampires had come from this direction. Of that, I was certain. The trail I had followed the night before had gone cold, but my instincts screamed that the key to their movements lay hidden in the embrace of the forest. The trees stood tall, their bare branches clawing at the sky, the ground beneath them frozen and unyielding. I moved with caution, my eyes scanning the horizon, my ears straining for any sound out of place. The forest was a different beast by day, its dangers more subtle, but no less deadly. I found the first clue not far from where I had encountered the vampires, a scrap of fabric caught on a thorn bush, the color a stark contrast against the white snow. It was a piece of a cloak, I realized, the material fine, expensive, not something a local would wear, especially not here, on the edge of the wild. It was a statement, a clue left with intention. They were taunting me, confident in their power, their immortality. The realization lit a fire within me, a burning need to wipe that arrogance from the face of the earth. I followed the trail further, my senses heightened, every shadow a potential threat, every rustle of leaves a whisper of danger. The forest opened up suddenly to a clearing, the ground here disturbed, the snow trampled and stained in places with dark spots that could only be blood. It was a message, a declaration of territory. This was their hunting ground, and I was the intruder here. The audacity of it fueled my resolve. These creatures had no idea who they were dealing with. I spent the rest of the day mapping the area, noting potential lairs and escape routes, memorizing the lay of the land. The vampires were careful, but they were creatures of habit, bound by primal urges they couldn't fully control. They would return here, and when they did, I would be ready. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky with hues of fire and blood, I made my way back to town, the weight of the coming night heavy on my shoulders. The streets of Frost Hollow were quiet, the earlier bustle replaced by an uneasy stillness. The townsfolk knew, on some level, the nature of the darkness that surrounded them, even if they refused to acknowledge it. I returned to the shadows, to the solitude that was my constant companion, the plan forming in my mind clear and sharp. I would draw them out, turn their confidence against them. The night would be long, and the darkness deep, but I was no stranger to either. The hunt was on, and I was the predator here. Let the vampires come. I would be waiting, blade in hand, ready to remind them that even immortals could bleed. The night descended on Frost Hollow like a shroud, draping the town in shadows that seemed to pulse with unseen life. The cold deepened, a physical presence that wormed its way through my clothing, a constant reminder of the environment's hostility. I welcomed it, let it sharpen my focus, a counterpoint to the fire that burned within me, a hunger for the hunt, for vengeance against the creatures that dared to claim this town as their hunting ground. I moved through the streets, a ghost among the flickering lights of the town, my steps silent, my breath controlled. My earlier reconnaissance had paid off. I had a plan, a path carved through the darkness toward the heart of the enemy's lair. The fabric, the blood-stained snow, the arrogant display of power. It all pointed to one place, the abandoned mill on the edge of town. A relic from a bygone era, now nothing more than a husk, a perfect hiding place for those who shunned the light. The mill loomed ahead, its silhouette a darker patch against the night sky, the windows empty sockets, the door a gaping maw. It was silent, too silent, the kind of stillness that screamed of danger, of a trap waiting to be sprung. I approached with caution, every sense alert, my hand resting on the hilt of my knife, the silver blade a comforting weight against my thigh. The mill's darkness was oppressive, pressing in from all sides as I advanced through its interior. My senses stretched to their limits. Each step felt like a descent into the depths of an ancient crypt, where shadows whispered secrets of the dead. The air was laced with the stench of decay, a testament to the mill's long abandonment, mingled now with a more sinister scent. The sweet, coppery smell of blood, fresh and pungent. There, in the heart of the darkness, it waited. A silhouette that seemed to draw the scant light into itself, a void where no light dared to linger. The vampire's eyes found mine, gleaming with a malevolent intelligence, orbs of pure, unadulterated hunger. It stood motionless, a predator assessing its prey, its body a coiled spring of lethal power. The silence stretched between us, a taut line ready to snap. And then, with a speed that mocked the very notion of human reflex, it attacked. The vampire launched itself at me, a blur of shadow and malice. But I wasn't just any prey. Years of hunting these creatures had honed my instincts, sharpening them until they were as lethal as the blade I wielded. I sidestepped, the vampire's claws slicing through the air where I had been mere moments before. The miss didn't deter it. If anything, it seemed to amuse the creature, a smirk playing across its too perfect features. It was fast, but I had more than speed. I had strategy. As it turned to face me again, I feinted to the left, then struck. My blade, a sliver of silver death, sang through the air, aiming for the heart. But the vampire was no novice to combat. It parried with a speed that seemed to mock the very laws of physics, its own nails elongated into razor-sharp talons that gleamed with a deadly light. Our dance was a deadly one, a back and forth of attack and counter, each move more desperate than the last. I could feel the strain of the fight, muscles protesting, lungs burning. But I pushed through the pain, driven by a singular purpose. This creature, this abomination, had taken too many lives, had haunted Frost Hollow for too long. It managed to graze my arm, a line of fire that burned with an unnatural chill. But pain was a small price to pay. I used the momentum, spinning away from the vampire's follow-up strike, and found my opening. As it overextended, I dove beneath its guard, my blade aimed not for its heart, but its thigh, hampering its movement. The vampire howled, a sound of rage and pain that echoed off the mill's decaying walls. It stumbled, the injury a chain around its supernatural speed, but it was far from defeated. Eyes burning with hatred, it launched a barrage of attacks, a tempest I barely weathered. Each block, each dodge, took everything I had. And then, the moment I had been waiting for, a lapse in its relentless assault. I lunged, not with a simple thrust, but with a calculated strike, feinting high before sweeping low, a move designed to bring the vampire into the path of my blade. The silver bit deep, a lethal arc that found the creature's heart. The effect was instantaneous. The vampire's scream tore through the night, a sound of ultimate defeat as its body began to crumble, turning to ash from the wound outward, until nothing remained but a pile of dust on the cold, hard ground of the mill. In the end, it was over, as quickly as it had begun. The vampire's ashes lay at my feet, its immortal life extinguished. I stood over it, my breath coming in ragged gasps, my heart a drumbeat of triumph and sorrow. Another creature of the night vanquished, another shadow banished by the light of my blade. But there was no time for reflection, no moment of respite. The night was still young, and the mill held more secrets, more dangers. I moved on, deeper into the heart of darkness, each step a declaration of war against the creatures that preyed upon the living. The victory in the mill was a fleeting satisfaction, a momentary blaze of triumph in the enduring night of Frost Hollow. The ashes of the vampire lay behind me, a testament to the threat that lurked in the shadows, but also a beacon illuminating the path forward. The fight had been a clarion call, a declaration that the hunt was far from over. With each step away from the mill, the weight of the night seemed to grow heavier, a palpable pressure against my skin, as if the darkness itself sought to push me back, to bury me in the cold embrace of the snow. I knew better than to believe the battle would be straightforward. Vampires, especially those who had survived long enough to cloak themselves in the veneer of humanity, were cunning adversaries. They would not have nested in Frost Hollow without reason, and the one I had dispatched was likely not a lone predator, but a scout, a harbinger of the larger threat that nested within the town's heart. The streets of Frost Hollow lay before me, silent and watchful. The snow, undisturbed but for my own footprints, reflected the moonlight, casting an ethereal glow over the town. It was a deceptive beauty, masking the danger that lurked in every shadow, behind every closed door. My next move needed to be calculated with precision. The element of surprise was my greatest ally, and once lost, would not be easily regained. I moved with purpose, retracing my steps back to the heart of the town. My mind was a whirlwind of strategy and conjecture, piecing together the clues I had gathered. The vampire's presence at the mill, the reactions of the townsfolk, the oppressive silence that blanketed the town. They were pieces of a puzzle, edges that hinted at a larger, more sinister picture. My path led me to the edge of the forest that bordered Frost Hollow, a sprawling expanse of wilderness that the town had turned its back on, as if ignoring the darkness would make it disappear. But I knew better. The forest was not just a backdrop to the town, it was a domain, a kingdom where the line between predator and prey was drawn not in sand, but in blood. The moon, a silent witness in the sky, cast its silver light through the dense canopy of trees, creating a mosaic of light and shadow on the snow-covered ground. I entered the forest, my senses heightened, every sound, a snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, amplified in the stillness. The cold here was more intense, a biting chill that sought to seep into my bones, but I pushed forward, driven by a need to uncover the truth, to peel back the layers of darkness that cloaked Frost Hollow. The trail I followed was not marked by footprints or signs of passage, but by a feeling, an instinct honed through years of hunting. The forest seemed to watch, to wait, its breath held in anticipation of the violence to come. And then, as if in answer to the unspoken challenge, I found it. A marker, not of wood or stone, but of blood. A symbol, painted on the trunk of a tree with deliberate strokes. A calling card of the vampires, a marker of their territory. The realization sent a shiver down my spine, a mixture of dread and excitement. I was on the right path, moving closer to the heart of the darkness. The symbol was a warning, but also an invitation. A taunt from the vampires, confident in their power, their immortality. But I was not deterred. If anything, the discovery only fueled my resolve. The vampires of Frost Hollow would learn, as so many before them had, that immortality was a relative term, that even the night had its end. I pressed on, deeper into the forest, following the trail of symbols like breadcrumbs through the darkness. Each step took me further from the world of men, into a realm where the rules were written by tooth and claw, where every shadow could conceal a nightmare. But it was in this darkness that I thrived, where my purpose became clear. The hunt was my calling, and I would answer it, no matter how deep into the night it led me. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, the sensation that eyes lingered on me from the shadows, calculating, waiting. Frost Hollow, for all its outward tranquility, was a town perched on the edge of a knife, its fate hanging by a thread I was determined to sever. I made my way toward the heart of the town, each step deliberate, my senses on high alert. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the crunch of my boots on the snow-covered ground. I couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding, a premonition of the violence to come. My destination was an old, abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. It was a place I had been avoiding, its dark history a beacon for the kind of evil that now infested Frost Hollow. The warehouse had been the site of a massacre years before, a tragedy that had left the town scarred, its wounds never truly healing. It was the perfect lair for the vampires and their thralls, a place where death lingered like a persistent fog. As I approached, the air grew colder, a tangible presence that wrapped around me like a shroud. The warehouse loomed ahead, a monolith of decay, its walls pitted and scarred by time. The windows were dark, the glass shattered and gone, leaving gaping holes that stared out like empty eye sockets. I paused at the entrance, my hand resting on the hilt of my knife. The silver blade had been a gift, forged with a skill that bordered on alchemy, its edge sharp enough to cut through the night itself. It was more than a weapon. It was an extension of my will, a conduit for my rage against the creatures that dared to prey on the innocent. Taking a deep breath, I stepped inside, the darkness enveloping me like a second skin. The interior was vast, the air thick with the scent of mold and decay. My footsteps echoed in the emptiness, a lone heartbeat in the silence. I moved forward, my eyes scanning the darkness, searching for any sign of the vampires. And then I saw it. A flicker of movement in the shadows, swift and silent. I tensed, my grip on my knife tightening. A thrall emerged from the darkness, its eyes hollow, its movements jerky and unnatural. It was a puppet, its strings pulled by a master hidden in the darkness. The thrall lunged, a guttural snarl erupting from its throat. I sidestepped, my blade slicing through the air, a silver flash in the darkness. The thrall crumpled to the ground, its body disintegrating into ash before it even hit the floor. But there was no time to savor the victory. The air was suddenly thick with them, thralls emerging from the shadows like wraiths, their faces twisted in rage. The fight was a blur of motion, my blade a whirlwind of death. Each thrall I cut down turned to ash, their existence snuffed out in an instant. But for every one I fell, two more took its place, a never-ending tide of darkness that threatened to overwhelm me. And then, from the depths of the warehouse, a new presence made itself known. A vampire, its aura of malice, a palpable force in the darkness. It stepped into the light, its features cruelly beautiful, its eyes alight with an unholy fire. The vampire moved with a grace that was almost mesmerizing, its speed otherworldly. We clashed, blade against claw, a dance of death that left no room for error. The vampire was a formidable opponent, its strength and speed far surpassing those of its thralls. But I was not without my own skills, honed through years of hunting creatures of the night. I fought with a desperation born of necessity, each strike, each parry, a testament to my determination to end this nightmare. The battle raged, the warehouse a cacophony of snarls and the ring of steel, and then, with a final, desperate effort, I found an opening. My blade sang, a silver arc that ended in the vampire's heart. The effect was instantaneous. The vampire's scream tore through the night, a sound of ultimate defeat as its body began to crumble, turning to ash that drifted away on the wind. With its death, the remaining thralls faltered, their link to their master severed. One by one they fell, reduced to nothing but dust on the warehouse floor. Breathing hard, I stood alone in the aftermath, the weight of the battle settling around me like a cloak. The warehouse was silent once more, the darkness retreating to the corners, cowed by the light of my victory. But the fight was far from over. The vampires had left their mark on Frost Hollow, a stain that would not easily be erased. I sheathed my knife, its blade stained with the ash of my enemies, and stepped back into the night. The hunt continued, and I was its harbinger. The night deepened, wrapping Frost Hollow in a veil of darkness that felt almost tangible, a barrier between the world of the living and the realm of nightmares I hunted. The victory at the warehouse was far from a killing stroke. The vampires and their thralls, entrenched within the town's shadows, were more than mere predators. They were a plague, a malignant force that needed to be excised root and branch. Equipped with more than just my trusty silver blade, I patrolled the streets, a .45 caliber handgun nestled against my side, its weight a constant reminder of the dangers that lurked in the unseen. The gun was loaded with custom rounds, silver-tipped and engraved with runes, a modern solution to an ancient problem. It was a blend of old-world lore and new-world firepower, a testament to the evolution of the hunter as much as the hunted. The cold had a sharper edge tonight, or perhaps it was the anticipation of the confrontation to come that made it seem so. Frost Hollow, with its quaint homes and snow-lined streets, was a picture of winter tranquility, a facade that belied the war being waged in its heart. I moved through the town, a silent specter, my steps careful to avoid the crunch of snow that could betray my presence. As I neared the town square, the silence was shattered by a scream, raw and terrified, a sound that cut through the night like a knife. My instincts screamed, propelling me forward, my hand instinctively going to the grip of my gun. The scream had come from the direction of the old church, its spire a dark silhouette against the night sky, a landmark that had stood watch over Frost Hollow for centuries. I approached with caution, the shadows my allies, as I made my way toward the source of the disturbance. The churchyard was a maze of tombstones and mausoleums, the dead a silent audience to the drama that unfolded within their domain. The scream had ceased, replaced by a palpable tension, a sense of impending violence that hung in the air like a storm waiting to break. And then they were upon me, thralls, their faces twisted in rage, their movements a grotesque parody of life. They surged forward, a wave of fury and hunger, but I was ready. My gun roared, a thunderous sound that shattered the silence, each shot a harbinger of death. The silver-tipped bullets found their marks, the thralls disintegrating into ash with each hit, a grim spectacle of destruction that painted the snow with shadows. But there was more than mindless thralls to contend with. From the shadows of the church emerged a figure, a vampire, its presence a cold fire that burned with malice. It moved with a grace that was chilling, a predator among predators, its eyes fixed on me with a hatred that was as old as the night itself. The gun in my hand was a small comfort against such a foe, but I was undeterred. I fired, each shot a prayer to the darkness, but the vampire was a wisp of smoke, a shadow that danced on the edge of vision. It was toying with me, a cat with its prey, but I was no helpless mouse. The vampire emerged from the shadows like a specter, its movements a chilling blend of grace and malice. The night air seemed to thicken, the darkness coalescing around it as if it were a part of the void itself. Its eyes locked onto mine, glowing with an unholy light, a predator's gaze that promised a swift, merciless end. I steadied my breathing, my hand gripping the .45 caliber with a resolve forged in countless battles. The custom silver-tipped rounds in the chamber were my answer to the darkness, each one a sliver of hope in this endless night. The vampire moved first, a blur that defied the natural laws of motion. It came at me, not straight on, but in a spiraling dive, like a falcon descending upon its prey. I fired, the gunshot a thunderclap in the silence, but it was already gone, a wraith amidst the gravestones. It taunted me, a voice that was both silk and steel, echoing from the shadows. "You think your weapons can harm me?" it hissed, its form flickering between the headstones, a shadow among shadows. I didn't answer. My response was another bullet, fired into the space it had just occupied. A miss, but it was close. Close enough to see the vampire's expression tighten, the first hint of doubt shadowing its features. The vampire was cunning, using the terrain to its advantage, moving with an unnatural speed that made it nearly impossible to track. But I was learning, adapting to its patterns, predicting its moves. It lunged again, this time from above, descending with claws extended, a death from the darkness. I rolled aside, the claws slicing through the air where I had been a heartbeat before. I came up firing, 2 shots in quick succession. The first missed, but the second found its mark, a silver bullet striking the vampire's shoulder. The impact was like striking stone, but the silver did its work. A scream tore from the vampire's throat, a sound of pain and fury that shook the night. The wound smoked, the flesh around the bullet's entry point blackening, disintegrating into ash. The vampire recoiled, its form blurring, a desperate attempt to escape the pain. But I was on it, closing the distance, my gun raised. It looked at me then, really looked at me, and in its eyes I saw a flicker of something like respect. "You are worthy, hunter," it spat, the words a grudging acknowledgement of our shared kinship in the dance of death. But there was no time for words. I fired again, the bullet a bridge between us, a messenger of final judgment. It struck true, piercing the vampire's heart, the only mercy a quick end. The effect was immediate and final. The vampire's scream cut off as abruptly as it had begun, its body convulsing once before beginning to disintegrate, turning to ash from the inside out. It looked at me, eyes wide with shock, then nothingness, as it collapsed into a heap of ash that the wind began to scatter. I stood alone in the silent churchyard, the echo of the gunshot still ringing in my ears. The vampire was gone, reduced to dust, a memory fading with the night. I holstered my gun, the weight of it a reminder of the cost of survival in this shadowed world. The fight was over, but the hunt went on. After the encounter at the churchyard, the silence of Frost Hollow felt heavier, as if the town itself was holding its breath. The victory over the vampire, a formidable foe turned to ash, was a stark reminder of the fragile line between hunter and prey. But there was little time to reflect on the ephemeral nature of such triumphs. The night was still thick with threats, and I knew the darkness harbored more than just the fallen. With the moon casting its indifferent light over the snow-blanketed streets, I set my sights on a new objective, a location whispered about in hushed tones among the townsfolk, the old Frost Hollow Inn. Rumors hinted at it being a haven not just for weary travelers, but for those who sought to conduct their macabre business under the guise of night. It was there I hoped to find the heart of this infestation, to draw out the vampires and their thralls in a decisive confrontation. The inn stood at the edge of town, its facade a mockery of hospitality, windows dark and unwelcoming. As I approached, the crunch of snow underfoot seemed to echo against the silent buildings surrounding me, a lone testament to life in a tableau of stillness. Drawing the .45, I felt the familiar weight of the gun, a reassurance in the uncertainty that lay ahead. I entered the inn with caution, the door creaking open to reveal a lobby trapped in time, its furnishings covered in a thick layer of dust, the air stale and cold. A chandelier hung overhead, its crystals dim and lifeless, a parody of elegance. The silence was oppressive, a tangible presence that seemed to watch, to wait. Moving through the deserted lobby, I made my way toward the heart of the inn, guided by an instinct honed through countless hunts. The corridors were a labyrinth, each turn revealing more of the inn's decrepit charm, a veneer of normalcy that barely concealed the rot beneath. It was in the inn's dining hall that I found them, gathered around a long table that groaned under the weight of a feast fit for the damned. The vampires and their thralls, a grotesque parody of a family gathering, their laughter a discordant melody that broke the oppressive silence. They hadn't noticed my presence yet, too caught up in their revelry, a mistake that would cost them dearly. I didn't hesitate, the element of surprise my greatest ally. The gun roared to life in my hands, the sound shattering the false tranquility as silver-tipped bullets found their marks. Thralls turned to ash before they could rise, their final screams a cacophony that drowned out the sound of gunfire. But the vampires were quicker, their supernatural reflexes a blur as they moved to counter the threat. The dining hall became a battlefield, the air thick with ash and the scent of blood. I moved with purpose, each shot a calculated risk, each movement a step in the deadly dance I had initiated. One vampire, more daring or perhaps more foolish than the rest, lunged at me, its fangs bared, a predator certain of its prey. But certainty turned to ash along with its body as my bullet found its heart. A reminder that in this hunt, I was the apex predator. The fight was over as quickly as it had begun. The dining hall now a tomb, the feast untouched, surrounded by the remnants of those who had partaken in a darker hunger. I stood alone amidst the destruction, the echoes of gunfire fading into the night. The Frost Hollow Inn, once a haven for the night's creatures, was now just another battleground in the war I waged. Stepping out into the chill of the night, the frost-laden air bit at my cheeks, a stark contrast to the heat of battle that still simmered in my veins. The moon overhead, a silent sentinel, cast its indifferent glow across Frost Hollow. its light a guide through the shadows that lay heavy on the town. My next move was clear, etched in the back of my mind with the precision of a blade. The vampire's stronghold, a derelict mansion on the outskirts of Frost Hollow, stood as the final bastion of the night's terror. Rumors and whispers had painted a picture of a place forgotten by time, where darkness reigned supreme, and from which the vampires orchestrated their nocturnal reign. The path to the mansion wound through the forest, a tangle of shadows and ice that seemed to watch with unseen eyes. Each step was measured, the crunch of snow underfoot a constant companion in the silence. My .45, now reloaded with the last of the silver-tipped rounds, rested heavy against my side, a reminder of the finite resources at my disposal. The mansion loomed out of the darkness, a structure of imposing stone and withered grandeur. Its windows, dark and empty, offered no welcome, its doors closed against the night. But it was what lay within that drew me forward, a pull as inexorable as the tide, the final confrontation that awaited. I breached the entrance with a quiet resolve, the door giving way with a reluctant groan. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of decay. The opulence of the mansion's heyday now surrendered to dust and shadows. My footsteps echoed through the grand foyer, a lone sound in the vast emptiness. The vampire's lair was not hard to find, its presence a stain that marred the air, a chill that seeped into the bones. The door stood ajar, an invitation or perhaps a challenge. I took a deep breath, steeling myself against the darkness that lay beyond, and stepped through. The room was a cathedral to night's worship, a grotesque altar at its heart where no godly rites were observed. And there, amidst the shadows, they awaited. The last of the vampires, their eyes gleaming with malice, their forms shrouded in darkness. There was no preamble to battle, no words exchanged, only the silent agreement of predators acknowledging their prey. The air was electric, charged with the imminent clash, and then erupted into chaos. The fight was a tempest, each movement a stroke of lightning, each contact a thunderclap. The vampires were formidable, their speed and strength honed over centuries. But they were not invincible. My gun spoke, each shot a death knell that tore through the darkness, silver-tipped rounds finding their mark, reducing vampire after vampire to ash. But the ammunition was finite, and soon the gun clicked empty, a hollow sound in the crescendo of battle. It was down to blade and will, the silver knife in my hand an extension of my resolve. We danced, a deadly ballet among the ruins of opulence, each strike, each parry a testament to the will to survive. And then there was one. The master of the house, the heart of the darkness in Frost Hollow. The vampire, its form a silhouette against the chaos it had wrought, halted its assault, a sudden calm amidst the tempest. Its eyes, those deep wells of malice, flickered with an emotion I hadn't expected. Desperation. "You are formidable, Hunter," it hissed, its voice a silk thread laced with venom. "Surely, you see the futility in our endless conflict. A truce, perhaps? There is much I can offer you: power, immortality. The night need not be your enemy." The offer hung in the air, a tempting fruit laced with poison. It was a testament to the vampire's cunning, a final gambit from a creature cornered by its own inevitability. But beneath its words, I sensed the fear, the realization that it faced not just its end, but obliteration. I weighed its proposal, not out of consideration, but to savor the desperation in its tone. "Your offers are as hollow as your heart," I replied, my voice steady, a counterpoint to the chaos that had preceded. "You mistake me for one who covets the darkness when, in truth, I am its bane." The vampire recoiled as if struck, its visage contorting into a mask of rage and fear. "Then you choose oblivion," it spat. As our gazes locked, an unspoken challenge passed between us. This was more than a battle. It was a reckoning. the culmination of every step, every life taken and saved, every shadow confronted in the pursuit of this moment. I advanced, my movements deliberate, the silver knife in my hand an extension of my resolve. The air around us seemed to thrum with anticipation, the very darkness coiling around the vampire, augmenting its sinister presence. With a speed that belied its ancient form, the vampire launched itself at me. Its attack was a blur, a storm of motion aimed to overwhelm and consume. I met its charge, sidestepping at the last moment, my blade slashing through the air, a silver arc that sought the creature's heart. But the vampire was no mere brute. It parried with a grace that was almost beautiful, its own claws a deadly counter to my knife, striking sparks in the gloom. We broke apart, circling each other, two predators recognizing the fatal dance for what it was, a duel to the death. It attacked again, a whirlwind of rage and despair. Each strike was a whisper of oblivion, each block a defiance of the darkness. Our blades met, silver against shadow, the clangor of our battle, a symphony of survival and destruction. I pressed the attack, driving the vampire back with a flurry of strikes that blended one into the other, a relentless assault that sought to breach its defenses. For a moment, I saw it. The flicker of uncertainty in the vampire's eyes, a crack in the armor of its centuries-long confidence. Seizing the moment, I feinted, drawing the vampire into an overextended strike. As it realized its error, I pivoted, my blade finding the gap in its guard, a sliver of silver in a thrust aimed at its heart. The impact was like striking stone, but the silver burned, a purifying fire that sought the corruption within. The vampire's scream was a sound of ages collapsing, a lamentation of empires fallen and darkness dispelled. It tried to retreat, to escape the agony of the silver's touch, but I was relentless, my blade a beacon of retribution. I advanced, each step a declaration of defiance against the night, each strike a note in the requiem of Frost Hollow's tormentor. And then, with a final cry that echoed the death throes of its reign, the vampire's form began to disintegrate, the silver having reached its unholy heart. The process was violent, an implosion of shadow and flame, the vampire's body turning to ash from the inside out, until nothing remained but a pile of dust on the ancient floor of its once impregnable fortress. The silence that followed was profound, a stillness that spoke of ends and beginnings. The mansion, freed from its dark master, seemed to sigh, a structure unburdened at last. I stood amidst the quiet ruin, the silver knife in my hand, the only evidence of the cataclysmic battle that had transpired. The dawn was near, a promise of light on the horizon, the end of the night's dominion. The mansion, once a stronghold of darkness, now stood silent in the aftermath of the night's final battle. As I stepped out into the chill of the pre-dawn, the air felt different, lighter somehow, as if the very atmosphere of Frost Hollow had been cleansed by the destruction of its ancient predator. The mansion loomed behind me, a silent testament to the night's events, its darkened windows no longer watching, but rather mourning the loss of their master. The battle had taken its toll, not just on the physical landscape of the town, but on me, the hunter. My body ached with a myriad of bruises and cuts and gouges in my skin, each one a badge of survival, a mark of what I had endured to see this hunt through to its bitter end. The silver knife, now sheathed at my side, felt heavier than before, its blade stained with the ash of those it had sent to their final rest. As I made my way back through the sleeping town, the first light of dawn began to break over the horizon, casting long shadows that retreated like specters at the coming of the light. The snow, untouched but for my own footprints, sparkled under the nascent light, a field of diamonds that belied the bloodshed it had witnessed. The streets of Frost Hollow were silent, the town still lost in slumber, unaware of the battle that had raged in the darkness to save them from the nightmare that had haunted their nights. I wondered, as I walked, how many would believe the tale if I were to tell it. How many could accept that the monsters they feared in the dark were real, and that their safety was owed to the solitary efforts of a hunter they did not know existed. I reached the town square as the sun crested the horizon, its rays banishing the last of the night's chill. The church, its steeple casting a long shadow across the cobblestones, stood as a silent witness to the night's events. It was here, in the heart of Frost Hollow, that I paused, taking a moment to reflect on the journey that had brought me to this point. As the sun rose high above Frost Hollow, casting its light over streets now silent and peaceful, I stood at the edge of town, looking back at what had become a battleground in the shadow of night. The dawn brought with it a sense of closure, the light a balm to the darkness that had enveloped the town and my soul alike. The vampires of Frost Hollow, a scourge that had lurked in the shadows, preying upon the unsuspecting, were no more. Their reign of terror, sustained through the ages, had ended, not with a whisper, but with a resounding echo of defiance. The journey here, paved with danger and draped in the mantle of solitude, was a testament to the path I had chosen. Or perhaps, the path that had chosen me. The hunter's life is a solitary one, marked not by triumphs celebrated, but by silent victories, acknowledged in the quiet moments of dawn when the world still sleeps, unaware of the darkness that had been kept at bay. The mansion, the inn, the churchyard, each had been a stage for a confrontation between light and darkness, a physical manifestation of the eternal struggle that raged within me. With every thrall that turned to ash, with every vampire that met its end upon my blade or with a bullet from my gun, I felt a piece of the night's hold on Frost Hollow, and on me, slip away. Yet, as I prepared to leave, to vanish into the light of day as if I were no more than a shadow myself, I couldn't shake the feeling of what I was leaving behind. Frost Hollow would wake to a new day, its citizens none the wiser to the battles fought in their name. The town would move on, its scars slowly healing, its nightmares fading into the light of day. But the hunter's work is never done. The darkness would gather again, in this town or another, and I would be there, a sentinel in the night. The weight of the gun at my side, the feel of the silver knife against my skin, were reminders of the burden I carried. A burden I bore willingly. For though the night is full of terrors, it is also full of beauty, of moments of quiet strength and resilience, of battles fought not for glory, but for the promise of another dawn. So, with a final look back at Frost Hollow, I stepped into the light of the new day, the shadows of the night retreating from my steps. The road ahead was long, winding through shadows and light, through towns haunted and hallowed. But I walked it with a steady stride, for I am Lucas Moore, hunter of the night, a monster hunter. And as the sun ascended, banishing the last of the shadows, I knew that no matter where the darkness gathered, there would always be light. A light that, like me, would stand vigilant against the night. A beacon for those lost in the darkness, guiding them home.